period of time known as the Gilded Age in the United States took place in the late 19th century, from about the 1870s to about 1900. The nickname for this time period came from the famous writer Mark Twain, who described this period of time as an era of serious social problems masked by a thin layer of gold, or gild, kind of like if we had a piece of jewelry that was covered in gold and God only knows what's underneath. That is to say, it looks great and inviting from the outside, but you don't know what you're going to get until you get inside and get under the surface. The Gilded Age was an era of rapid economic growth, especially in the northern and western parts of the United States. Higher wages in America caused an influx of millions of European immigrants, and it also helped aid in the rapid industrialization during this time period. Most immigrants came from the southern and eastern parts of Europe, as well as Asia. As was previously mentioned, the Gilded Age was a time of economic growth, and among the industries that grew by leaps and bounds were the railroad system, factories, mining, and finance or banking were ever increasing in importance. The people leading these charges were called the captains of industry, who became household names that everyone knew, like John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil, Andrew Carnegie of Carnegie Steel, and J.P. Morgan, who was a very powerful banker who controlled and bankrolled very many industries and businesses. The way they made their money was not always fair, but the government system that they called laissez-faire, which is just kind of like hands-off, let's stand back and see what goes on, meant there were a few rules and regulations that these businesses actually had to follow. As a result of all of these abuses by the men of industry, people started to form labor unions, and they became much more important when it came to fairly treating workers. Unions crusaded for an 8-hour workday and the abolition of child labor. Middle-class reformers demanded civil service reform, which means that people had the right to choose who they wanted to elect to any political position without the fear of being pressured or bullied into voting for somebody you didn't want to choose. Among other things that were worked on at this time, prohibition of alcohol and women's suffrage. Even though the Gilded Age was a time period marked by growth, expansion, and invention, it was also a time of abject poverty and inequality, as many millions of immigrants from poor countries came into the United States hoping to make a better life for themselves and for their families after them. However, they quickly realized that that was not going to happen, and the expectations and the realities of coming to a new country were vastly different. Not only was that standing in the way of our economic and industrial growth as a nation, but we also had two major nationwide depressions, the Panic of 1873 and the Panic of 1893, which temporarily interrupted growth and caused much social and political upheaval in the country, or problems. And this period will give way to the period of progressive thought, or the Progressive Era.
Good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go.